The morning of March 15th was gray and damp, like most spring days in Millertown. The small town in Ohio was waking up slowly. Farmers had been tending to their livestock for an hour. Shop owners were preparing for another quiet day, and most residents were still stretching in their beds. On the outskirts of town, near the bus stop next to the old Shell gas station, stood a man with a worn sports bag in his hands. Marcus Thompson looked older than his 35 years. 8 years in an Ohio state prison had left their mark, premature gray in his dark hair, deep wrinkles around his eyes, and the slumped shoulders of a man accustomed to keeping his head down. His jeans and plaid shirt were washed clean, but clearly from a prison thrift store. The bus to Millertown was 20 minutes late. Marcus was in no hurry. He now had all the time in the world. When the bus doors finally opened, he silently handed the driver a crumpled $5 bill and made his way to the back seat. The other passengers, an elderly woman with a bag of groceries, a teenager with headphones, a worker in dirty overalls, didn't even glance in his direction. Marcus was grateful for the anonymity. The 40-minute ride passed in silence. Marcus looked out the window at the familiar landscape: cornfields, scattered farmhouses, old barns with peeling paint. Everything was exactly the same as 8 years ago, when he was being taken in handcuffs in the opposite direction. Only now he was returning a free man, formally. In the center of Millertown, he got out at the main square, next to the Clark County Courthouse. The 2-story brick building with white columns looked exactly the same as it had on the day he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for rape. His sentence was reduced to 8 years and 2 months for good behavior. Marcus stopped in front of the courthouse and took a folded newspaper clipping out of his pocket. The article was dated the day before yesterday. Judge Robert Collins celebrates 25 years on the bench. In the black and white photograph, a gray-haired man in a judge's robe smiled next to his daughter. Judge Collins is proud of his daughter Emily, who is continuing the family tradition of serving the community as a social worker, read the caption under the photo. Emily Collins, 26 years old. She was a grown woman now, but Marcus still remembered the 18-year-old girl who had pointed at him in the courtroom with a trembling finger and said, "That's him. He raped me." Marcus folded the clipping and put it back in his pocket. He knew where she worked. The Clark County Social Services Center was only 3 blocks away, but he wasn't going there today. Today he needed to get settled, find a place to live, a job, prepare. Across the square was the Traveler's Inn, a cheap motel for truckers and casual visitors. Marcus rented a room for $35 a night, paying a week in advance. The room was small and stuffy, smelling of cigarettes and cheap deodorant, but it had 2 important advantages: a window overlooking the courthouse and complete anonymity. While Marcus was unpacking his few belongings, a few blocks away, Judge Robert Collins was finishing his morning divorce hearing. At 58, he was still an imposing figure, tall, with noble gray hair and piercing blue eyes. 25 years on the bench had taught him to read people like an open book, but today something was bothering him. Court clerk Dolores Clark, who had worked with him for 15 years, noticed his nervousness. "Judge Collins, are you all right? You seem distracted today." Robert took off his glasses and rubbed his nose. "Just tired, Dolores. These divorce cases always wear me out, especially when children are involved." But that wasn't entirely true. That morning, while reviewing the weekly reports from the Department of Corrections, he saw a name that made his blood run cold. Marcus Thompson, parole. Date, March 15th. Today. Robert remembered the case better than he wanted to. The rape of his own daughter had shaken not only his family, but the entire town. Emily was only 18 at the time, just out of high school and planning to go to college. After that, everything changed. Robert picked up the phone and dialed his daughter's number. "Dad?" Emily's voice sounded surprised. She rarely received calls from her father during working hours. "Emily, I need to tell you something. Marcus Thompson was released from prison this morning." There was a long silence. Robert could hear his daughter breathing heavily. "Emily, can you hear me?" "Yes, Dad, I'm fine. Thanks for letting me know." "Listen, maybe you should take a few days off? Go stay with Aunt Margaret in Columbus?" "No!" Emily's voice grew firmer. "I'm not going to hide. This is where I work. This is my home. He served his time, and now we have to move on." After talking to her father, Emily Collins sat in her office at the Social Services Center and tried to focus on her paperwork, but her father's words echoed in her head. Marcus Thompson is out of prison. 8 years had passed since that terrible night. 8 years of therapy, medication, sleepless nights, and slow recovery. Emily thought she had come to terms with the past, that she had learned to live with what had happened. But one mention of that name brought all the memories flooding back. She was young, naive, walking home from a classmate's party. A dark alley, a sudden push, rough hands, the smell of alcohol and sweat. Then the hospital, the police, the court, and that man, Marcus Thompson, staring at her from the dock with cold, angry eyes. Emily shook her head, trying to push the memories away. She picked up a photo from the table, a snapshot from last year's center picnic, where she was smiling surrounded by colleagues and the children she worked with. This job had saved her. Helping other people in difficult situations gave her life meaning. Later that day, Marcus left the motel for the first time. He knew Emily's schedule. He had often seen her go to school and then to college when he was a child. And now he had found information about her job on the library's website. The Social Services Center closed at 5:30. He waited on a bench in the park across from the center, hiding behind a newspaper. At 5:40, the door opened and Emily came out. She had changed. She looked older, more confident, but he recognized her immediately. Same auburn hair, same determined chin. Emily walked to her car, a used Honda parked at the end of the block. Marcus watched her every move, memorizing her route and the time. He made a plan. When the car disappeared around the corner, Marcus folded the newspaper and returned to the motel. In his room, he took a notebook and pen out of his bag. On the first page, he wrote, "Plan." Then he began to write down everything he had learned that day. Emily's work schedule, the make and color of her car, and her route from work to home. At that moment, Detective Sarah Mitchell was finishing her shift at the Millertown Police Department. A 42-year-old woman with short graying hair and tired brown eyes, she had been working for the police for 20 years. During that time, she had investigated many cases, from petty theft to murder, but the Marcus Thompson case stood out in her memory. 8 years ago, she was one of the detectives investigating the rape of Emily Collins. The case seemed straightforward. There was a victim, a suspect, and evidence. Marcus Thompson worked as a handyman, lived alone, and had no alibi for the time of the crime. Emily identified him in a lineup. Everything seemed to fit, but something about the case always bothered Sarah. Maybe it was too convenient, too obvious, or maybe it was something about Marcus himself. He didn't look like a typical rapist. Quiet, withdrawn, but not aggressive. In court, he maintained his innocence to the end, even when his lawyer advised him to confess in exchange for a reduced sentence. But doubts are doubts, and evidence is evidence. The jury returned a guilty verdict, and Marcus got his 10 years. This morning, Sarah received notification of Thompson's release. Formally, she was supposed to just file the document away and forget about it. Former prisoners were released every day. But something made her remember that old case. Those doubts she had never been able to completely dispel. That evening, the Collins family gathered for dinner at their home on Main Street. The 2-story Victorian mansion was the judge's pride and joy. He had bought it as a young lawyer and spent years restoring it. Now the house was a perfect reflection of his status in the community. The atmosphere at the table was tense. The judge's wife, Margaret, an elegant woman of 54, tried to keep the conversation going, but she could sense her husband and daughter's unease. "Emily, dear, you haven't touched your food," she said. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm just tired from work." Robert put down his fork. "Emily, I'm serious. Maybe you really should leave town for a while, until we know what he's up to. Dad, it's been 8 years. He's served his time. He's a free man now, and he has the right to live where he wants." "But not here," the judge snapped. "Not in the same city where his victim lives." Emily flinched at the word victim. She hated being called that. "Robert, please," Margaret said softly. "Let's not talk about this over dinner." But the conversation was already ruined. Emily apologized and went up to her room. Robert went to his study, and Margaret stayed behind to clear the table, thinking about how one crime could destroy so many lives. In his motel room, Marcus lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. He was holding another newspaper clipping, an article from 8 years ago about his arrest. "Local man accused of raping judge's daughter," read the headline. In the photo, he looked younger, more frightened. Back then, he still believed that the truth would prevail, that justice would triumph. 8 years had taught him otherwise. The truth was what the jury decided. Justice was what the judge determined. And he, Marcus Thompson, was just a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The next morning, Marcus woke up at 5 o'clock, a habit developed over years of prison routine. It was still dark outside the motel window, with only a few streetlights illuminating the empty square. He took a shower, shaved, and headed to Mary's diner across the square. The diner was one of the few places in Millertown that was open 24 hours a day. It was a gathering place for truckers, night shift workers from the local factory, and police officers at the end of their shifts. Marcus took a table by the window, which offered a good view of the entire square, and ordered coffee and eggs. The waitress, a heavy-set middle-aged woman with tired eyes, brought his order without showing much interest in him. But at the next table sat a man in a security guard's uniform who was glancing furtively at Marcus. Small towns had a way of remembering faces, especially those of criminals. As Marcus ate his breakfast, his thoughts returned to that fateful evening 8 years ago. It was Saturday, September 12, 2017. Marcus was working as a handyman on a construction site, renovating an old school. The pay was good, but the work was hard, and by the end of the week he was usually exhausted. That evening he decided to have a beer at the Golden Stag, the only decent bar in town. The bar was packed, a local band was playing, young people were dancing, and older men were playing pool. Marcus sat alone at the bar, sipping his beer and watching a football game on TV. He noticed Emily Collins. She was with a group of classmates celebrating someone's birthday. She was a beautiful girl, the daughter of a judge from a good family, not his crowd. Around midnight, Marcus paid his bill and walked home. His cheap car had broken down again, and he didn't want to waste money on a taxi. He lived in a trailer on the outskirts of town, in a mobile home park for the poor. It took him about 40 minutes to walk there at a leisurely pace. The next day, Sunday morning, the police knocked on his door. 2 officers and a detective, a young woman with a serious expression. "Detective Mitchell," she introduced herself. "Marcus Thompson, we need to ask you a few questions about last night." "What specifically?" "Where were you between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m.? "Walking home from the bar. What happened?" The detective did not answer directly. "Can anyone confirm your story?" "I don't think so. I was walking alone." 3 hours later, he was arrested on suspicion of rape. At the same time that Marcus was reminiscing, Emily Collins was sitting in Dr. James Harris's office at a private clinic on the outskirts of Millertown. Dr. Harris had been her psychiatrist for 7 years, ever since she had attempted suicide a year after the trial. James Harris was not like the typical psychiatrists you see in movies. At 45, he looked more like a university professor. Tall, thin, with a neat beard and soft brown eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses. He had moved to Millertown from Chicago 5 years ago, saying he was tired of the big city and wanted to help people in the countryside. "How are you feeling after yesterday's news?" he asked, watching Emily nervously fiddle with the strap of her purse. "Honestly? Scared. I thought I had dealt with the past, but just hearing his name, that's a normal reaction, Emily. You've been through a serious trauma. The fact that you've been able to build a successful career, help other people, and create a stable life speaks to your strength." Dr. Harris made notes in his notebook, occasionally looking up at his patient. Over the years he had worked with Emily. He had gotten to know her better than anyone else. He knew about her nightmares, her panic attacks, her fear of men. He knew how difficult relationships were for her, and how she struggled with depression. "Dr. Harris, what if he tries to get revenge? What if 8 years in prison have made him even more dangerous?" "Emily, statistics show that most released prisoners simply try to start a new life. They want a job, a place to live, and the opportunity to rejoin society. But what if he's not like most people?" Dr. Harris put down his pen and looked at her intently. "Do you have reason to think that?" Emily was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "It's just a feeling, like something bad is going to happen." After the session, Dr. Harris sat in his office for a long time, thinking about Emily's words. Over the years of therapy, he had become more than just her doctor. He felt a deep emotional connection to this woman. Her pain, her struggle for recovery, her courage, it all touched something deep within him. Sometimes he caught himself thinking that his feelings for Emily went beyond the professional. He justified it as a doctor's concern for a patient, but deep down he knew that wasn't entirely true. Meanwhile, Detective Sarah Mitchell sat in the police station archives, rereading an 8-year-old case file. The thick folder contained all the investigation materials: interrogation reports, crime scene photos, medical reports, witness statements. At first glance, the case seemed ironclad. Emily Collins said she was returning home from a friend's house around midnight. She decided to take a shortcut through the park in the city center. There, she was attacked by a man who dragged her into the bushes and raped her. The attacker was dressed in dark clothing, smelled of alcohol, and was of average height and build. The next day, Emily reported that she had seen a man at the Golden Deer Bar who seemed suspicious to her. He was allegedly staring at her and her friends. A composite sketch was made based on her description, and several witnesses identified Marcus Thompson as the man matching the description. A search of Marcus's home turned up a dark jacket, with stains that were determined by experts to be blood. DNA analysis was positive. The blood belonged to Emily. Fabric fibers from the victim's dress were also found on the jacket. Marcus claimed that he had never seen the jacket and that someone had planted it in his trailer, but he had no alibi. He had been walking home alone, and no one could confirm his whereabouts at the time of the crime. During a lineup with 6 people, Emily pointed to Marcus without hesitation. "That's him. I'm 100% sure." Reading the testimony, Sarah remembered that day. Emily looked pale, frightened, but determined. Her father, Judge Collins, sat next to her, holding his daughter's hand, supporting her. Marcus stood in the lineup with a stony face, staring straight ahead, but something about the case had always bothered Sarah. Maybe it was too convenient, or the fact that Marcus had never been charged with a violent crime before, just petty theft as a teenager and public intoxication. Sarah turned the page and came across the conclusion of the psychiatrist who had examined Marcus before the trial. The subject does not show signs of antisocial personality disorder. Aggressive tendencies are not pronounced. A propensity for violence is not confirmed. This report was not taken into account by the court as the material evidence seemed irrefutable. That same day, around 3 in the afternoon, Marcus went looking for work. He knew it would be difficult to find a decent job with a criminal record, but it was worth a try. The hardware store, tools and everything for the home, was looking for a loader. The store owner, a man in his 60s with a gray mustache, carefully studied his application. "Thompson? Aren't you the Thompson who—" "Yes, that's me. But I've served my time and want to start a new life." The man paused, then shook his head. "I'm sorry, but I can't hire you. I have a lot of female customers here, you understand." Marcus received the same response at an auto repair shop, a building supply store, and a gas station. Everywhere he went, he was politely but firmly refused employment. News of his return had already spread throughout the small town. By evening, tired and disappointed, Marcus returned to the motel. A surprise awaited him in the lobby. A police officer was standing behind the front desk, talking to the motel owner. Seeing Marcus, the officer turned to him. "Mr. Thompson? I'm Officer Jenkins. I'd like to talk to you." "About what?" "About the rules. You are on parole. That means you must report to your probation officer every week, not leave the county without permission, and stay at least 100 yards away from the victim. I know the rules." "Good, because if you break them, you'll go back to prison early, and I'll be making sure you follow those rules." The officer left, and the motel owner looked nervously at Marcus. "Listen, mister, I didn't know who you were when I rented you the room. Maybe you should find another place? I paid for a week in advance." "Yes, of course, I won't take the money. Just after this week, maybe." Marcus silently went to his room. He understood what was happening. The city wasn't ready to take him back. Everyone saw him as a criminal, a rapist, a threat. No one wanted to give him a chance to start a new life. He sat down on the bed and took out his notebook. Under the heading Plan, he wrote a new line. They won't let me live in peace. At that moment, Emily Collins was finishing her day at the Social Services Center. She worked with troubled teenagers, children from dysfunctional families, orphans, juvenile delinquents. This work gave her the feeling that she could change someone's life for the better. Today, she was finding it particularly difficult to concentrate. Her thoughts kept returning to Marcus Thompson. She remembered his face in the courtroom, cold, angry, full of hatred. She remembered how he looked at her when the sentence was handed down. She saw no remorse in his eyes, only rage. As she left the building, Emily looked back. She thought she saw someone watching her, but the street was busy as usual. People rushing home from work, students heading to the library, elderly couples strolling through the park. Her worried father was waiting for her at home. Judge Collins had been unable to concentrate on his work all day, thinking about the possible threat to his daughter. "Emily, I spoke to the sheriff. They'll be patrolling our neighborhood more often, keeping an eye on Thompson." "Dad, he has a right to live here, as long as he doesn't break the law." "He already broke the law, 8 years ago, and who knows what he's capable of now?" Emily sank wearily into a chair. "Maybe I really should leave for a while, until it's clear what he wants." "That's sensible. You'll be safe with Aunt Margaret in Columbus." But even as she said it, Emily knew she wouldn't run away. This was her home, her job, her life. Marcus Thompson had already turned her world upside down once. She wouldn't let him do it again. Late that night, as the city fell asleep, Marcus stood at the window of his motel room and stared at the dark courthouse. Somewhere in there, a few blocks away, Emily Collins was sleeping. The woman who had ruined his life with one false accusation. He opened his notebook to a new page and began to write. Not a plan, but something else. Memories. The truth about that night 8 years ago. The truth that no one wanted to hear. Marcus's third day in Millertown began with a surprise. Early in the morning, there was a knock on his door. Standing outside was a middle-aged man in work clothes. "Are you Marcus Thompson?" "Yes. I'm Bill Stevens. I own a car repair shop out of town. I heard you were looking for work." Marcus looked at him warily. After yesterday's rejections, he hadn't expected this turn of events. "The work is hard and the pay is low. But if you don't drink and you're good with your hands, there's a job for you." "Why did you decide to hire me?" Bill shrugged. "Because 15 years ago, I was in prison for theft. I know what it's like to try to start over." An hour later, Marcus was at the auto repair shop, a small workshop in an industrial area on the outskirts of town. The work was hard, unloading parts, washing cars, helping the mechanics. But it was better than sitting in a motel planning revenge. While Marcus was working, Emily went to her appointment with Dr. Harris. "How are you? Did you sleep well?" "No, the nightmares are back, like 8 years ago." Dr. Harris frowned. "What kind of nightmares?" "The same ones. The dark alley, the rough hands, the smell of alcohol. But now the attacker's face is clearer. It's definitely him." "Emily, sometimes our memory can distort events, especially under stress." "You don't believe me?" "No, that's not it. It's just that sometimes it's helpful to separate the memories from the emotions we're feeling now." After the session, Dr. Harris sat in silence for a long time. In his 7 years of working with Emily, he had noticed that her memories of that night sometimes changed. Minor details, the sequence of events, her description of the attacker, all of it varied from session to session. He had attributed this to post-traumatic stress, but now other thoughts were troubling him. That same day, Detective Mitchell decided to conduct her own investigation. She drove to the Golden Stag Bar. The establishment was still in business, although it had a new owner. 8 years ago? My God, that was a long time ago, said the current owner, a man in his 40s with tattoos on his arms. But Jackie was working as a bartender back then. She might remember something. Jackie Morgan, a 50-year-old woman with dyed hair, did indeed remember that evening. Of course I remember. The judge's daughter was raped. The whole town was talking about it. Are you talking about that guy, Thompson? Yes. Do you remember him? He used to come in sometimes. He was quiet, sat by himself, drank beer. He didn't bother anyone. I was surprised when I heard he'd been arrested. Do you remember that night? Jackie thought for a moment. I remember there were a lot of people. Emily Collins and her friends were celebrating. They were having fun, dancing, and Thompson was sitting at the bar, watching TV. Did he pay attention to the girls? No more than any other man, but he didn't approach them or flirt with them. He just sat there and drank. This information did not match Emily's testimony, who claimed that Marcus had been staring at her intently. That evening, Marcus returned to the motel tired, but satisfied. His first day on the job had gone well, and Bill Stevens seemed like a fair employer. Perhaps he really could start a new life, but that hope was quickly dashed. Judge Collins was waiting for him in the motel lobby. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk." Marcus stopped, staring at the man who had once sentenced him to 10 years in prison. "What about, Your Honor?" "I know why you came back, and I want to offer you a deal." The judge took an envelope out of his pocket. "Here's $5,000, enough to start a new life in another city, far away from my family." Marcus looked at the envelope, then at the judge. "You think I can be bought? I think you're a smart man. No one is waiting for you here. No one will give you a decent job or a decent place to live. Why torture yourself?" "What if I don't agree?" The judge's face hardened. "Then I'll make your life here unbearable. I have connections, influence. You won't be able to find a job, rent a place to live, or even buy groceries. I'll be watching your every move." Marcus took the envelope and slowly tore it in half. The bills scattered across the floor. "Leave me alone, Judge. I served my time, and I have the right to live where I want." "Not near my daughter!" "I never even went near your daughter. But if you keep threatening me..." Marcus didn't finish his sentence, but the implication was clear. The judge turned pale and quickly left the motel. The next day, Marcus came to work and found that he had been fired. "Sorry, man," Bill Stevens said without looking him in the eye. "I got a call from the city administration. There's a problem with your license. If I don't get rid of you, they'll shut down the shop." Marcus realized that this was the judge's doing. The threats were not empty words. Meanwhile, Dr. Harris decided to take matters into his own hands. He knew that Emily worked late on Thursdays and decided to walk her to her car. "Dr. Harris? What are you doing here?" "I'm worried about you. After that man came back, I wanted to make sure you were okay." Emily was touched by the doctor's concern, but something about his behavior seemed strange to her. "Thank you, but I'm fine. There are a lot of people here. Security. Nevertheless, let me walk you to your car." On the way, Dr. Harris cautiously asked Emily about her fears, her plans for the future, and her relationship with her family. He seemed to be studying every detail of her life. "Doctor, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "Why did you move to Millertown? For a psychiatrist of your caliber, it's a rather strange choice." Dr. Harris hesitated. "I wanted to help people. In big cities, there's too much competition. Everyone's chasing money. Here, you can really change someone's life." But the real reason was different. 5 years ago in Chicago, he had problems with his medical license due to unethical behavior with a patient. He was forced to leave and start over in a small town where no one knew his past. That night, Marcus sat in his room and continued writing his memoirs. He reached the most important moment, that night 8 years ago. "I was walking home alone. It was almost midnight. On Main Street, I ran into Jim Parker. He worked as a night security guard at a bank. We talked for about 5 minutes about work and the weather. Then I kept walking. Before turning toward the mobile home park, I decided to stop at the 24-hour store to buy some cigarettes. But the store was closed, even though it was supposed to be open. I remember being surprised. When I got home, I went straight to bed. I woke up to a knock on the door. It was the police. They said a girl had been raped in Central Park. I didn't even know she was the judge's daughter. When they arrested me, I thought it was a misunderstanding. I thought it would all be cleared up quickly. But then, they found this jacket." Marcus paused, remembering that moment. The jacket was indeed his, but he didn't remember wearing it that night. Moreover, he didn't remember ever seeing blood on it. During the investigation, he tried to explain this to the police. He said that someone could have planted the jacket, that he had been framed. But who would have wanted to do that? He had no enemies. He didn't bother anyone. Only now, 8 years later, was he beginning to understand what had really happened, and who could have been behind the false accusation. The next day, Detective Mitchell decided to talk to Jim Parker, the night security guard Marcus had mentioned in his statement. She found him at home, an elderly man who had been retired for several years. I remember that guy, Thompson. He was a good man, a hard worker. I don't believe he could have done that. Did you see him that night? Yes, around midnight. He was walking home from the bar. We had a chat. He was sober, calm, normal. Why didn't you testify at the trial? Jim grimaced. No one asked me, and when I went to the police myself, they told me they didn't need my testimony. The case was clear. This was another inconsistency. A witness who could have confirmed Marcus's alibi had not been questioned by the investigation. Sarah knew that the case needed to be reopened, but that would require solid grounds. New evidence was needed, or a confession that the old evidence had been fabricated. In the meantime, Marcus, having lost his job and faced with open hostility, was making a final decision. If the town wasn't going to give him a chance at a normal life, if the judge was willing to destroy him, then it was time to act. He opened his notebook to a new page and wrote, "Tomorrow I will tell Emily Collins the truth. The whole truth about what happened 8 years ago." Friday, March 23rd, was a rainy and gray day. Emily Collins was finishing her workday at the Social Services Center when she received an anonymous note. The security guard brought it to her around 5 in the evening. "Someone left this for you at the front desk," he said. The note was written in block letters on a plain sheet of paper. "I need to talk to you about what happened 8 years ago. I'll be waiting at the old warehouse behind the railroad tracks at 7 p.m. Come alone. This is important. MT." Emily read the note several times. MT, Marcus Thompson. He wanted to meet her alone. Every instinct told her not to go, to call her father, to call the police. But something in the tone of the note, formal and almost pleading, made her think twice. She tried to call Dr. Harris, but his phone was off. There was little time left. It was already 6:30. Emily got into her car and drove to the warehouse. The old brick building was located in an industrial area that had long since fallen into disrepair. Most of the businesses had closed, and the area was practically abandoned. Parking next to the warehouse, Emily saw that the door was ajar. A dim light was on inside. She entered cautiously, looking around. "Mr. Thompson, are you here?" A voice came from the depths of the warehouse. "Yes, I'm here. Thank you for coming." Marcus stepped out of the shadows. He looked tired and exhausted. He was holding a notepad in his hands. "Why did you call me here?" Emily asked, trying to remain calm. "Because I need to tell you the truth about that night, about what really happened." "I know what happened. You raped me." Marcus shook his head. "No, I didn't do that, and you know it." Emily took a step back. "What do you mean?" "You know very well that I didn't attack you that night, because no one attacked you." Emily's face turned pale. "You're crazy. Of course someone attacked me. I had injuries, blood, which you inflicted on yourself, or someone helped you do it." Marcus opened his notebook and began to read. 8 years ago, I met Jim Parker around midnight. We talked for 5 minutes. He can confirm that. At the time the rape allegedly took place, I was several blocks away from the park. That's a lie. Then explain to me how my jacket with your blood on it ended up in my house. I don't remember wearing it that night. Someone planted it there. Emily was silent, but Marcus could see her hands shaking. "You know what I've learned in 8 years in prison? That someone planned my conviction very carefully. Someone who knew my schedule, my wardrobe, someone who had access to my trailer." "You're delusional. Why would I frame an innocent man?" Marcus took a step forward. "That's a good question. Why would an 18-year-old girl from a good family stage a rape?" Emily turned toward the door, but Marcus blocked her way. "Maybe you had problems? Drugs? Pregnant by the wrong guy? Or just wanted to get daddy's attention?" "Get away from me! I spent 8 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I just want you to tell the truth." "The truth is that you're a rapist, and now you're threatening me." "I'm not threatening you. I'm demanding justice." Their cries echoed off the walls of the empty warehouse. Emily was hysterical. Marcus was furious at the injustice. The situation was quickly spiraling out of control. "Fine!" Emily suddenly shouted. "You want the truth? Yes, I lied. No one raped me, but you still got what you deserved." Marcus froze. "What? You think you're so innocent? What about Susan Meyers? Who's Susan Meyers? The girl you molested when she was 14. You think no one knows? Marcus shook his head. I don't know what you're talking about. She was too scared to go to the police, but I knew, and I decided that justice had to be served. You're crazy. I never touched any children. Liar, you're all the same. All men are predators. There was so much hatred in Emily's voice that Marcus realized something was seriously wrong with her. 8 years in prison, a ruined life, the stigma of being a criminal. All because of the sick fantasy of an unstable girl. The rage he had suppressed for 8 years finally burst out. You ruined my life. Marcus grabbed an iron pipe lying on the floor. Emily tried to run away, but he caught up with her at the exit. Please, don't, she screamed. But it was too late. Years of rage, pain, and injustice took over. Marcus raised the pipe and struck. Emily fell to the warehouse floor. Blood flowed from the wound on her head. Her eyes were open, but she was no longer breathing. Marcus stood over the body, breathing heavily. The iron pipe fell from his hands with a clang. He had killed her. He had killed the person who had ruined his life with false accusations. He stood there for a few minutes, realizing what had happened. Then he took out his cell phone and dialed 911. Police? I want to turn myself in. I just killed Emily Collins. 20 minutes later, the warehouse was surrounded by police. Detective Sarah Mitchell was the first to enter and saw Emily's body. Marcus was sitting nearby, calmly awaiting arrest. Marcus Thompson, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder. You have the right to remain silent. While the officers read him his rights, Sarah examined the crime scene. Everything was crystal clear, a crime of passion, the murder weapon, the killer's confession. But something bothered her. Why had Emily come here alone? Why had Marcus asked her to meet him and then called the police himself? Detective Mitchell, one of the officers shouted. There's something here. Near the body, they found Marcus's notebook, open to the page with notes about that evening 8 years ago. Next to it was a voice recorder, a small digital device that had been recording the whole time. Sarah pressed play and heard Emily's voice. Do you want the truth? Yes, I lied. Nobody raped me. The recording contained Emily's full confession to the false accusation. While the police were working at the crime scene, news of the judge's daughter's murder spread throughout the city. Judge Robert Collins arrived at the warehouse and saw his daughter's body being carried out. No! Emily! He had to be restrained to keep him from rushing into the crime scene. Collins screamed, demanding the death penalty for the killer and promising to use all his influence. But Detective Mitchell was already listening to the recording of the conversation between Marcus and Emily. What she heard turned her understanding of the 8-year-old case upside down. Marcus was placed in a holding cell at the police station. He did not resist, did not demand a lawyer, did not deny his guilt. He just sat there silently, knowing that his life was completely ruined. But now, at least, the truth was recorded on a tape recorder. That evening, Dr. Harris learned of Emily's death on the news. He sat in his office holding her medical records in his hands and cried. The woman he loved with a secret, painful love was dead. Saturday, March 24th, began for Detective Sarah Mitchell, with listening to the recording for the third time. Emily Collins's voice sounded clear. Yes, I lied. No one raped me. But this confession raised more questions than it answered. At 8 in the morning, Sarah went to the county jail to question Marcus Thompson. He sat in his cell, calm and resigned to his fate. Mr. Thompson, do you admit to the murder of Emily Collins? Yes, I killed her. Tell me what happened. Marcus described in detail the meeting at the warehouse, the conversation, the moment he lost control. Why did you record the conversation? I knew she might lie again. I wanted proof of the truth. Sarah showed him the transcript of the recording. Emily mentioned someone named Susan Meyers. Who is she? Marcus shook his head. No idea. Never heard that name before. She accused you of molesting a 14-year-old girl. Detective, I spent 8 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. But I have never, do you hear me, never touched a child. That is a monstrous lie. Sarah saw fatigue in Marcus's eyes, but not lies. Years of police work had taught her to distinguish truth from deception. After the interview, Sarah went to the Millertown High School archives. If Susan Meyers existed, she must have attended the school around the same time as Emily. The school secretary, an elderly woman with glasses, studied the request carefully. Susan Meyers? Yes, she went here. She graduated in 2015, a quiet girl from a troubled family. Do you have her contact information? I'm afraid not. She left town after high school. I heard she had a drug problem. Meanwhile, Dr. James Harris sat in his office studying Emily's medical records. Over the course of 7 years of treatment, he had compiled a detailed picture of her psychological state. The entries from the last few months were particularly troubling. He picked up the phone and dialed Detective Mitchell's number. "Detective, this is Dr. Harris. I need to talk to you. It's about Emily Collins." They met at a cafe in the city center. Dr. Harris looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Detective, I have something to tell you about Emily's mental state." Sarah took out her notebook. "I'm listening." "In recent months, she's had frequent bouts of paranoia. She started seeing threats where there weren't any. I suspected she was developing bipolar disorder." "Is this related to the rape 8 years ago?" Dr. Harris hesitated. "Possibly. But there's one thing that's always bothered me." "What is it?" Her memories of that night kept changing. The details, the sequence of events, her description of the attacker, it all varied from session to session. Sarah frowned. "You think she made it all up?" "Not made it up, believing her own lies. It's called false memory. A person tells the same story so many times that they begin to believe it themselves." "But why would she lie?" Dr. Harris sighed deeply. "I think the answer lies in her family, in her relationship with her father." That evening, Sarah went to Judge Collins' house. The 2-story house on Main Street was full of relatives and friends who had come to offer their condolences. The judge looked 10 years older. "Detective Mitchell, I hope you're here to tell me that this killer is going to get the maximum sentence." "Mr. Collins, I need to ask you a few questions about your daughter." "About what exactly?" "About her mental state 8 years ago. About the reasons why she might have falsely accused Marcus Thompson." The judge's face flushed with anger. "How dare you? My daughter was the victim." "Sir, we have a recording of her confession. It was coerced. She was scared. That maniac threatened her." The judge's wife, Margaret, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, suddenly spoke up. "Robert, stop it." "What?" "Stop lying. Detective Wright. Emily lied 8 years ago." There was dead silence. The judge looked at his wife in disbelief. "Margaret, what are you saying?" I always knew. That night Emily came home drunk, in a torn dress. She said she'd fallen off her bike, but the next day she reported being raped." Sarah leaned forward. "Why didn't you say anything?" Margaret Collins began to cry. "Because I knew why she did it. Emily was pregnant." The judge turned pale. "What?" "By that boy, Danny Rogers, the mayor's son. Remember how you said you'd never let her date that loser? How you threatened to send her to a boarding school if you found out about their relationship?" Sarah was beginning to understand. She faked the rape to explain the pregnancy? Yes. A month after the trial, she had a miscarriage, and the story with Marcus Thompson became her new reality. The judge sat with his face in his hands. "My God, what have I done?" The next day, Sarah found Danny Rogers. He was working as a mechanic in a neighboring town, was married, and had 2 children. When she told him the truth, he burst into tears. "I loved her. I wanted to marry her. But when the rape happened, she stopped talking to me. She said she couldn't be with a man after what happened." "Didn't she tell you she was pregnant?" "No. This is the first I've heard of it. If I had known..." Danny Rogers could have been the father of Emily's child, her husband, her support in difficult times. Instead, his life took a different turn, and Emily was left alone with her lies. Returning to Millertown, Sarah thought about the chain of tragedies that began with one false accusation. Marcus Thompson lost 8 years of his life for a crime he did not commit. Emily Collins lived 8 years trapped in her own lie, which became her reality. A judge destroyed an innocent man's life because of his own self-confidence and unwillingness to find out the truth. On Monday, Sarah presented a full report to the district attorney. The evidence of Marcus's innocence in the rape was irrefutable, but that didn't change the fact that a murder had been committed. "What do you recommend?" asked the prosecutor. "Second-degree murder. There was no premeditation, it was a crime of passion. Considering the circumstances of the case, 8 years of unjust imprisonment. But he still killed a man. Yes, and he must be punished, but fairly. Marcus Thompson's trial took place 3 months later. The story of the false accusation was widely reported in the press. Public opinion was divided. Some considered Marcus a victim of the system, others a cold-blooded killer. Marcus's court-appointed lawyer presented a recording of Emily's confession, witness testimony, and evidence of his innocence in the rape. He asked for leniency, given the circumstances of the case. The prosecutor insisted on the maximum sentence for second-degree murder, 25 years in prison, In his final statement, Marcus said, "I am not asking for forgiveness for killing Emily Collins. She ruined my life with a false accusation, and I lost control. But I regret that I couldn't find another way to get justice. Maybe if the system had worked properly 8 years ago, we would both still be alive." The judge sentenced Marcus to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. After the trial, Detective Mitchell visited Marcus in prison. "Do you regret anything?" she asked. "That I couldn't prove my innocence sooner. That Emily had to live with a lie for so long. That her father never tried to find out the truth. What about the murder?" Marcus was silent for a long time. "I regret that it came to this. But I don't regret that the truth finally came out." Judge Robert Collins resigned a month after the trial. He could no longer pass sentence knowing that he had been part of a miscarriage of justice. He devoted the rest of his life to working for an organization that helped victims of miscarriages of justice. Dr. James Harris closed his practice and left Millersville. In his notes, he left a detailed analysis of Emily's case, how lies can become reality in a sick mind. Danny Rogers visited Emily's grave every year on the anniversary of her death. He brought white roses and told her about his family, about the children they would never have together. Margaret Collins sold her house on Main Street and moved in with her sister in Columbus. She couldn't live in a town where every street reminded her of the tragedy. Millertown gradually forgot about the case of Marcus Thompson and Emily Collins. New scandals and tragedies took the place of old ones. But in the police station archives, a folder of documents remained, evidence of how one lie can destroy many lives. Before retiring, Detective Sarah Mitchell wrote a detailed report on the case. She wanted future generations of police officers to remember that justice does not always prevail on its own. Sometimes it has to be sought, even when everything seems obvious. In her conclusion, she wrote, "Justice is not what a jury decides. It is what we must strive for every day, in every case, with every person." Marcus Thompson was innocent of rape, but guilty of murder. Emily Collins was a victim of her own lies, but she destroyed the life of an innocent man. Judge Collins wanted to protect his daughter, but refused to see the truth. They all paid the price for justice being sacrificed to other interests.